Okay, I've got another thing to show you about the adrenals. And we're talking about the endocrine system in this particular series. Look at this. Okay, we got, I hope that's not backwards. This is my iPad. You've got cortisol, blood sugar, and insulin. What happens? Increased cortisol leads to increased blood sugar, leads to increased insulin. Okay? Increased cortisol leads to increased blood sugar and increased insulin. What does that sound like to any of you who are familiar with type 2 diabetes? Another word to describe type 2 diabetes is insulin resistance. Now, what does that mean? You have a cell, right? You got we have like a gajillion cells in our body, right? So we've got, let's look at one cell. And there's always blood flow around the cell. All of our cells are swimming. We're like 80% water, right? 75, 80% water. Okay? So we got this cell. Each of our cells need to be fed regularly. Just like we need to be fed regularly, right? We need to eat every 4 to 8 hours, depending on who we are. We need to eat certain foods. We know that, right? We can't just go outside and eat a bunch of grass. That's not gonna work. We as the human body need a lot of things because we need lots of nutrients. But that cell's more simple. That cell needs glucose. That's what it needs. Okay? So with all the foods we chew and swallow and digest and absorb into our blood, which then swims around the body, between eating it and getting it into the blood, what happens? We can make glucose. We can extract the glucose out of the food, okay? Glucose. What's another word for glucose? Blood sugar. Fasting blood glucose. Fasting blood sugar. That's a lab test, okay? Right? So you've got blood glucose, which means blood sugar, flowing and being carried in the blood. Every cell needs to get fed, just like we humans need to get fed regularly. Otherwise, it starts to fade and get unhealthy, right? And eventually, if we go without food, we'll die. If the cell goes without food, it dies. So the body makes darn good and sure that there's loads of glucose, blood sugar, around to insert into the cell, to feed the cell with, okay? Got it? Yes, we're still talking about the endocrine system. Okay, cortisol, adrenal fatigue, blood sugar, diabetes type 2, insulin. How does insulin come into play? Between here and glucose into the cell. Where do you think the insulin is? The insulin is at the doorway of the cell. All right? The blood sugar is coming through. The cell goes, oh, I need some of that. An insulin and a blood sugar will come in and meet at the cell's doorway, at the edge of the woods. Okay? That insulin, now holding hands with that blood sugar molecule, invites the blood sugar in so the cell can eat it and have fuel, sustenance. Okay? So the insulin is who in the cell? The insulin is the gatekeeper. At least for blood sugar. There's a ton of gatekeepers in the cell. A ton of them. So blood sugar is meandering away, swimming around in the blood, and the cell goes, I'm hungry, I need some blood sugar. And the insulin goes, oh, I can take care of that. And the insulin comes along and the blood, and then the sugar comes, and then the sugar can come into the cell and the cell gets fed. So what's insulin resistance then? Why do we get diabetes in the first place? What is diabetes? Diabetes type 2, I'm not talking about type 1. Type 1 is totally different, okay? Type 2 diabetes is too much blood sugar. Too much blood sugar, okay? So basically, we've got a cell, we've got a whole bunch of insulin there, and there's a whole bunch of blood sugar going around it, swimming around it, swimming around it, swimming around it. And the cell can only handle so much, right? Like it's got to use the blood sugar once it gets it, right? It's got to ramp up its metabolism. There's something called, this is really technical, close your ears if your brain's exploding already. There's something called a mitochondria in there, and that produces, it makes the end, it's like the motor of the cell, and so it causes the energy, right? So when we do take a blood sugar molecule into the cell has to then do something with it. It can't just sit in the cell. So the furnace starts to go, right? Cell heats up. All right. So what happens when there's too much blood sugar? Well, the body's really smart. And even when the cell's not all that hungry and doesn't want any more blood sugar, the body will make the cell bring in more blood sugar anyway. Or it will turn the blood sugar into fat and store it on our body, okay? When we overeat, the body has to produce extra insulin, because insulin is the thing that gets the sugar out of the blood. Because not only is the insulin there to feed the cell, but the insulin is also there to get the blood sugar out of the blood. Because if there's too much blood sugar in our blood, the blood gets unhealthy. Okay, it gets sticky and syrupy. It's called glycosylation. That's hemoglobin A1C. If anybody's had a blood sugar test and you're monitoring your diabetes, you're going to get a hemoglobin A1C lab test, okay? There's another word for hemoglobin A1C. It's called glycosylated hemoglobin. I wouldn't judge you if you watched this video 5 or 6 times. This is a lot. But wouldn't it be amazing if you could understand what's going on and why cortisol, stress, might affect our risk of type 2 diabetes? See, I know, I got to circle around, but remember, we're talking about cortisol here. Where are we at? We're at sticky, syrupy blood sugar. Sticky, syrupy blood. So the blood has too much blood sugar in it. Okay? Blood sugar's sticky. Sugar is sticky, right? Maple syrup is sticky. Honey is sticky. Why would it be any different in the blood, right? So the insulin has to get the blood sugar out of the blood to keep the blood healthy. So the body will put a whole bunch of insulin on the cells to get the blood sugar out of the blood. Okay? Over time, the cell gets overwhelmed and says, no more blood sugar. I'm overfed. No, I can't do it. I'm tired. This is not healthy. Just leave me alone. And it stops letting the insulin bring the blood sugar into it. It gets more resistant to it. It's like, I don't want that. And the body goes, oh, you have to. The blood needs to be healthy. You need to do something with this glucose. Get it into you. So the body will overfeed its cells in order, because the body will protect the blood over pretty much anything else. The body will protect the blood at the sacrifice of the cells. Okay? So we get a whole bunch of insulin, and the body just like sticks a whole bunch of insulin onto that cell, so that when the sugar comes along and there's so much of it, all of those insulins. You get so it's not just one that's dealing. Let's say you got 5 instead. You got 5 times as many blood sugars as you need in the blood. That's pretty sticky blood sugar, and so you got 5 insulins on the cell now, on the receptors, right? And then so all that stuff comes along and it grabs it, it sticks to it, and then the cell's just like, ugh. And then it eventually comes in. All right, but over time, the cell gets better and better at like closing the door on the insulin and being like, no, you don't get to come in. And so what happens is that we get more glycosylated hemoglobin in our bloodstream. Our hemoglobin A1C goes up above 6, and the doctor says we need medication. And the medication tries to force the blood sugar down in the body in whatever creative ways that the pharmaceutical does that. Medication, diabetes type 2, boom, that's how it happens. Insulin resistance is the cell resisting the insulin, the gatekeeper, from getting sugar into it. Because it's like, no, I'm done. Like, I'm full. I don't want any more. Don't force feed me. Right? This is not type 1 diabetes. Totally different thing. This is type 2 insulin resistance. This is what this is. So how then does cortisol come into play? Well, I don't have time to explain the entire process. If you're interested, book an appointment with me. I'll explain it to you. But you're going to have to suffice it to say that when cortisol is high, the body puts more insulin on the cells. And it actually intentionally puts more blood sugar in the blood. So not only if we're like overeating and we're stressed, we got double blood sugar problems over the long term. If we go through like 2 months of stress, we're okay. But if this is a habit, if this is like we're constantly putting ourselves in stressful situations, or we're constantly, unfortunately, in a stressful situation and we're dealing with food cravings, it's probably a good idea to try and use other medicines besides food to deal with our stress. Because we are we're like extra increasing our risk of type 2 diabetes when we're stressed. Because not only will the body crave easy sugars, but it'll also increase blood sugar manually. Why? Because the body has programming, right? The body has programming. It does its best to balance itself out, but if we're in a stressful situation and that subconscious mind, the autonomic nervous system, if that part of us has decided that we need to produce cortisol at the expense of happy hormones, that cortisol automatically increases blood sugar. That's just the way it is. That's the way cortisol operates. That's how the body is programmed. Increased cortisol, blood sugar's going up. Because according to the subconscious mind, we're heading into battle, so we're going to need all the calories we need to get us through, right? We gotta get through that battlefield. So the body just, that's how we're programmed. That's how we're wired. So cortisol, stress increase, cortisol increase. Cortisol increase, blood sugar increase. Blood sugar increase, sticky blood increase. Hemoglobin A1C. Elevated blood sugar. Elevated fasting blood sugar. Cells that aren't entirely happy about the situation. And what does it all come down to? We're not feeling great. We're stressed. We're stress eating. Our nervous system's doing the best it can to give us the comfort zone we need to settle so we can sleep, so we can function, so we can be good to our kids and our family, so that we can keep our temper and have patience, so that we can get that email answered, so that we can make a living for ourselves. So if you listen to this video and thought, oh, that's me, be kind to yourself, because there's greater things at play back here. Sure, the body's wired to do that. And yes, it's probably helpful if you look at it. So you just had the courage to look at it. You need to be proud of yourself. That's not an easy thing to look at. I want you to give yourself a great big hug right now for getting through this video, because that wasn't easy. Good job. Now you understand it. And if you're going to watch it again and again and again, give yourself 4 or 5 more hugs, because it's not an easy thing to look at. Now you've seen it. You've chosen curiosity. You're already on the road to healing. You're already getting better. There's a few other things at play. You know that instinctively. Your gut tells you that. Let's look at that. Let's help you understand the process. That'll help you. Usually does. Help you overcome the root cause of the problem, the root cause. And if you're at that stage in your health journey, I can help. Give me a call or send me a message. We'll get you booked in.